first of all, just thank you for having me on your show. I definitely appreciate this opportunity for me to share about what my life has been. It seems like my life has been a series of grief stories. And so, just to give a bit of history and leading up to my most current losses, when I was 15, my brother, he was my youngest brother. I'm the youngest child, period, but he was my fourth brother. The youngest, I was 15 and he was 19. He died tragically on his motorcycle 1 week before his high school graduation.
Ugh.
And so that was my first indoctrination into grief and loss. I'm the youngest of 7 children, and my brother and I were second generation children after my dad retired from active military. The first 5 kids my mom raised by herself while my dad traveled with the seas with the Navy. And then when my dad retired, they had me and my brother. So although I had 5 other siblings, he was really my rock and my central focus. And so when he passed away when I was 15, it was extremely devastating for me. And I couldn't understand this level of loss and this level of grief. However, the interesting thought is that we didn't know it at the time. My brother's fiance was expecting, and she was going
Wow.
to tell him at the graduation party. And so here it is now, my brother's passed away, and her parents, quite honestly, were like, you need to move forward with your life. And they didn't want her
Mm,
to have the child, like go on and, live your life now. And
right.
she wanted to hold on to this piece of the child. And so she didn't know how we would feel about it. I come from a very religious background, and she wasn't sure if my parents would, have a challenge, with this child and out of wedlock. And, it's just a whole gamut. And she's a teenager, so she's trying to navigate life. And so she never said anything. But my mom felt it. And so my mom
Mm.
actually confronted her about it. And sure enough, she had my nephew about six and a half, 7 months after my brother passed away. So needless to say, it's like, oh my gosh, I never really grieved my brother because now I have a piece of him. Like, okay, I have a piece of him that I can carry forward. And, Auntie P or, Aunt Paula has lots and lots of nieces and nephews. However, little Mark was my favorite, and I wasn't
Mm.
shy or, afraid to say that. I love you all. But sorry, he's my favorite. And so it was great having, another piece of my brother, even though my brother never got to meet his son. But grief has a way of at least following me because in the senior year of my nephew's life, he tragically passed away, just like his dad.
Oh my gosh.
So now I feel like it's double jeopardy, right? So yeah.
Wow.
And like the same
So
age too.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. Senior year of high school. Like it just was like, is this really happening? Like,
Right.
so I'm grieving now my nephew, and I'm really grieving my brother all over, again, because I never really grieved him. And so those 2 items, I think, were the first indoctrination
Mm.
into this grief journey for me. But then it continued because I have 3 other nephews that passed away, 2 of whom were
Jeez.
tragically murdered. I
Oh
have
my God.
3 of my other 3 brothers, they all passed away
Oh my
as
gosh.
well. Yeah. My dad passed away, and my mom passed away on my birthday
Oh.
in 2009. And then more recently, now getting to 2021, I had 4 brothers and 2 sisters. My oldest sister passed away on November the 18th of 2021. And literally 6 days later, unexpectedly, my husband of 30 years passed away. So
Oh
within
Mm.
6 days,
God.
my husband and sister both passed away. So grief is definitely something that
Yeah.
You know
Like,
about.
yeah, I know
What?
right.
about it.
Like in every possible way. I don't even know where to start. Okay. So 15 years old, your brother dies, and then so then 15 years or 16 years later, now your nephew dies. So quick math, you're around
Yeah.
30,
Yep.
early 30s. And then the train just keeps going from
The
there.
train
And you
just kept
just
going
like one after another, after another, after
after
another.
another, after another. Yeah.
So those I want to talk about, but I'm curious what your reaction, what you're feeling, what you're going through with after having all of that loss, but then losing your partner,
Mhm.
right? Like that is somebody that, so you were together 30 years, you said?
We were
So
married for
he
30 years. And literally, my husband knew me my entire life. Like,
right.
my husband was
Right.
8 years older, and my mom used
Yeah.
to change his diapers.
No way.
So, like, so he literally knew me my entire life. He was a family friend and probably the last person on earth that I ever thought I would marry. But he was
That's
a
wild.
wonderful husband. I mean, I received and I experienced a love that, quite honestly, most people might not ever
Yeah.
experience in life.
Yeah,
So,
that's exactly how I describe it with my wife.
yeah,
So you lose that constant in your life. Like he was
yes,
that constant through all of your grief
through
or
all of it.
most of it, you know?
Yeah, he was
And
there. I mean, he was there when when I was 15 and my brother died. I remember my husband and his family. I remember them coming to our house and sitting with us.
unbelievable.
And yeah, I remember he was there. My husband literally was there for every single loss.
So what did it
Yeah.
feel like to then lose that constant in your life after everything that you went through?
Yeah, it was very difficult because my husband was always my biggest encourager and my biggest
Mm,
supporter. I was telling someone the other day, he literally was the epitome of unconditional love.
wow. Wow.
Absolutely. He taught
Mm,
me that. He demonstrated that. And quite honestly, he almost seems a bit unreal because he
right.
really was. I mean, he wasn't a perfect
Hmm.
man. No one is,
Of course.
but he definitely was a perfect man for me. And he knew how to support me. He knew
Mm,
how to encourage me. He knew, how to stretch me. And, so yeah, losing him was extremely difficult.
hmm.
However, I often tell people that, sometimes you don't realize little things you do in life have long lasting impacts. And I believe that my husband, in some strange turn of events, he prepared me and my
Yeah.
3 sons for his transition. And so, I remember, if I can just tell the story, when my oldest son was around 5 or 6, my husband was off that day, and he's like, "Babe, when he comes home from school, we need to have the talk with him." And so, of course, as a boy mom, I'm thinking, the body talk. And
Right.
I'm like, well, isn't he a little young for that? And he's like, no, babe, we need to have the talk with him now. He's of the right age and we need to have the conversation. So I'm just like, okay, I mean, I'm a girl. I don't know.
Right.
So okay, let's go with it. And so
Yeah.
when my son gets home from work, my son gets home from school, my husband's like, "Hey, son, how was your day?" Little small talk, and he's like, "Listen, it's not going to take long, but I have something very critical I need to talk to you about,
Mm,
so I need you to pay attention." He's like, "Okay, Dad." And he was like, "Listen, I am honored to be your dad. There are tons of men in this world, and I'm the one that got chosen to be your dad, and I want you to know that." That means a lot to me, and I'm really honored. And he was like, of all the sons that could have been given to me,
mm,
you were the one that was given to me. And so that means a lot too. And he's like, but listen, I've never been a dad before, and you've never been a son before. He's like, so that means we're both doing something that we've never done. He's like, so as a result, we're going to do some things really, really well. We're going to nail it out of the park, son. And then other things, we're just going to mess up. And that's
mm,
okay. He's like, but at the end of the day, as long as we're honest with each other, as long as we work together, there's absolutely nothing that we can't accomplish. And he's like, so I'm committed as your dad to be here, to support you, to love you. And I need you to be the same. I need you to be supportive of me. I need you to love me. And I need us to always work together and not ever hold anything back from each other. And he's like, can you do that, son? And I'm sitting there like, wow, this is beautiful.
unbelievable.
And my son's like, yeah, dad. And so they did high five and a big hug. And he was like, okay. He's like, then this is what we'll do. This will be our relationship. And that was the end of the conversation. So I'm like, I'm feeling, oh wow, this is wonderful and beautiful, but I'm also feeling conflicted because I'm like,
Right.
well, you didn't talk about body parts, or I'm
Right.
like, and
Right.
so I said to my husband, like, that was beautiful, but like that was the extent of the conversation. And he's like, yeah. I said, but I thought you said we were having the talk. And he was like,
Right.
that was the talk. And he was just like, he's like, you were thinking like the other talk? I'm like, well,
Right. Like a
yeah.
sex
He's like,
talk or something.
yeah. And he's like, he's 5. And I'm like, okay,
I mean, but what else are you supposed to think? Right? Like
right. I'm
that's exactly where my head would go is like, oh,
exactly.
okay.
I'm like, I
What
don't
other
know.
talk?
So then I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, no, dear, we'll wait till he's like, close to teenager. I'm like,
That's
oh,
amazing.
okay. So then, of course, there's 8 years between my first and second son. And so when now my oldest son is around 13 and we had already had that other talk, it
Yeah.
was time to have the talk with my second son. And so my husband started off the same thing, but he started with my youngest son at the time, but then he went to my oldest son and said, you've never been a big brother, and
Wow.
I've never fathered 2 sons. And so he went through the same, process of assigning roles and responsibilities. And it was so beautiful. And so it was like, okay, then now it's 5 years between my I call him now my bridge son. I don't say my middle child, but now my bridge
Aw.
son and my youngest.
That's
And so
beautiful.
now at this point, there's 13 years between my youngest and my oldest. So he's a full teenager. Like he's graduating high school and this whole concept. And so my husband starts yet again with the youngest. I've never fathered 3 sons, and you've never been a son. He went to my bridge son, and that's when we actually assigned him the title of bridge, because now
Mm,
you're a connector between your oldest and your youngest. And so my husband went through this whole process of roles. And then we went to my oldest son. You're now junior dad because you have a responsibility
right.
to these younger 2 that are looking up to you. Like it was just so beautiful, but it was like 3 isolated conversations
Yeah.
over a number of years that were incredible. And my husband did this. And so then when my husband passed away suddenly on that day before Thanksgiving, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at my husband, I'm looking at my 3 sons, and like literally, I married my husband right out of undergrad. So I
Mm,
never lived as an independent adult. I didn't know what that meant,
Yeah.
or anything like that. And so I'm looking at my husband, I'm looking at my 3 sons. I'm like, how do we navigate this? And
mm.
like it literally popped in my head, like I'm doing something I've never done before. And
Wow.
so I started that conversation with my sons. And literally, although I sat through those 3 conversations, my sons and I never talked about those conversations. And so I started saying that, like, hey, I've never been an independent adult. I've never been a widow.
Yeah.
You've never been fatherless. And I'm saying this and pointing this out to my kids, and they started chiming in. Yeah, we're doing something, Mom, we've never done before. And they're like, yeah, and we're going to get some things right, and we're going to get some. And we all were standing there. We're looking at my husband, and we're hugging each other. We're
Mm,
crying, but yet we had this sense of intentionality
Yeah.
and purpose that my husband had instilled in us 25 years prior. And so like when I think about him not being here anymore, it hurts. It's
mm-hmm.
painful, but yet I have these 3 versions of him that I can look at. And of course, my 5-year-old grandson, who's probably the most hysterical version of him.
I
And so
love
I
that.
have these versions that I can look at and I can remember, and I have legacy. And so at the end of the day, as significant as his loss is, his legacy surpasses all of that. And it
Mm,
helps me.
that's
Yeah.
amazing. So, and how long ago did he pass?
It was November of 2021.
Mm,
So it's two and a
Oh.
half years.
so
Yeah, a little
recent.
over 2 years. Yeah.
Mm, yeah, it's interesting. I had not the same kind of conversations, but I had a conversation with Ashley's dad, actually, who lost his wife, Ashley's mom,
Okay.
and I remember we were sitting in my family room, and my wife was in hospice. We did hospice at home,
Mm.
and he told me, he's like, listen, she taught you guys everything you need to know.
Yep.
And you have to trust that she gave you everything that you're going to need to get through
Absolutely.
this. And I like that really carried me through, especially the first year,
Yeah.
because it's like that first year, you're just, I mean, you're just, you lose your identity,
Yeah. That
it's
year
like,
first is hard.
yeah. And
Yeah.
it's the same with you. Like my whole adult life, I was with her since I was 18 years old. My whole life essentially was her. It was always Ariana and CJ. And now it's like, I'm CJ. What does that mean? But so this was, man, so recent, 2.5 years ago. So how how did you navigate your grief through that first year? Really, I'm curious about, because you were so grief experienced through your essentially your whole life. I mean, since 15 years
Yeah.
old, like when it hit, did you already have tools in place that you could reach out to? Like, what was that experience like?
Yeah. I mean, that experience, it's devastating. It's earth shattering. And to be honest, every loss is different. The
Right.
loss of my brothers, my sisters, my dad, my mom, like they're all different. There's no comparative, like, oh yeah, you know how to handle this because you've been here before. No, I've never lost a spouse before.
Yeah.
I've never
That's
lost a
right.
sister, a sister. So it's all different, and you have to give each and every one of them their unique space.
Yeah.
Mm,
If anything, the common thread through all of the loss, I am a woman of faith. And so relying on my faith has definitely been something that helped me in prayer and, so forth, a supportive life system and all. But at the end of the day, practical tools, they had to come to me.
mm,
And so, like my husband and I, we were really big on, family meetings and establishing, family time and so forth. And I remember our first family meeting after my husband had passed away. The services had already occurred and, people weren't coming over as often. And so
yeah.
it's just now us like, okay, how do we navigate this? And just to give a bit of a backstory too, the year before, I guess, yeah, it would have been 2020, the year of COVID, we were, going through it all in the house, all my kids, we were all here.
Hmm.
And all of us, well, five of us got COVID. So I got it. My husband got it. I was the first one to get it. And then my oldest son got it. His wife, my husband, my two younger kids did not get it. And my grandson did not get it. But when we had COVID, I was the worst. Like I said, I was the first to get
Mm,
it, the last to recover. And there was a period of time with my COVID where I didn't sleep for almost 5 days. Like I couldn't get
jeez.
comfortable. It was horrible. I couldn't talk for more than 3 seconds, and so I was extremely loopy, extremely tired. And literally, as I've learned from my physicians, my body tried to reset itself and I had a seizure.
Wow.
And I never had a seizure ever in life before. And so when I had that seizure, I stopped breathing. And when I stopped breathing, my husband was the one who resuscitated me
Mm,
before the paramedics got to our home. And so by the time the paramedics got there, I was breathing, but I was unconscious. So my family had no concept. You go to the hospital, you can't visit. So they didn't know if they would ever see me again. Like they just didn't
yeah.
know. And so the level when my husband collapsed, and because he collapsed here at the house, when he collapsed and the paramedics had to come and resuscitate or attempt to resuscitate him on the very same floor
Mm,
where I was successfully resuscitated, but he was not. Going and sitting in my family room and being in that room is a constant reminder that there's a reason why I'm here.
mm,
I don't understand it. I can't
mm,
dwell on it, but there's a reason that I'm here. And I wish he were still here, but I'm here. And so for me, the most immediate thing became purpose and intentionality
yeah.
because I have these three human beings that are looking to me to lead them, to be a parent to them, and to help them. And then I also have to lead and parent myself
Right.
because I've never been an independent adult. I've never lived, on my own. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
So I've got to learn this. And so let's learn and let's grow together. So when we had that first family meeting after my husband passed away, I'm sitting there and I'm like, how do I lead so great a people? Like, what do I
Mm.
say to these kids? Like, I don't know what to say. And so I like literally, it came to me that, and I developed something that I call the 5 pillars of life.
Mm.
And those pillars have truly become life application and foundational for me and my family. So if you were to look at your hand, and if you look at your hand, you look at your thumb,
Mhm.
that's the foundation of your hand. Like 80% of your hand's function comes from your thumb. And so for us, that's spiritual, whatever spiritual looks like for you. Spiritual can look like different things to different people. So I'm not proclaiming that you have to be this or that. But whatever that spiritual thing is for you, that's your foundation. That's your grounding. That's
Mhm.
what holds everything else together. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar is your pointer finger. That's your health and wellness. Because if your body's not right, if your mind's not right, your spirit is not going to be able to do what you need to get done. You
Right.
need to have a healthy mind, a healthy body to support your spirit. So, health and wellness is your second pillar. The third finger is your middle finger. And so, Coach Paula is on a quest to redefine giving people the middle finger. And so, the middle
CJ,
finger,
Yeah.
CJ.
That
the
is my
middle
favorite
finger,
finger.
yeah, the middle finger, that's your longest finger. And that represents community and relationships.
Huh.
None of us are an island. And so that's why that finger extends beyond everything else, because we can't live in isolation. I mean, by nature, I really am an introvert. I'm
Yeah.
probably an
Same.
ambivert because I know how to be extroverted. But if I had my choice, I would stay on the introverted side, and so that community pillar is essential. Then you have the ring finger, which often, that's where we wear our wedding bands, right? And so that represents long-term relationships and
Mm.
long-term commitment. And for us and for me, that's a continuous learning. Like, I'm committed to a life of learning. I don't want to close my eyes at night and not have learned something
Right.
for that day. It could be something, doesn't have to be something major, but
Mhm.
every day I'm committed to learning something. So that's, education is another pillar. And then the last pillar is your little pinky. It's the smallest little finger on your hand, and it's small for a reason, but it yet still is significant. And this represents fun. Like, let's keep the balance. Like, you have the sturdy thumb on one end, and you got this pinky that's a balancer on the other end. That's your fun. It can't be all work, 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 and no play.
Right.
And so those 5 pillars became like, literally, I'm sitting in the family meeting and I was looking at my hands like, okay, what am I going to say to these kids? And those pillars just literally came to my heart and mind. And so I began to share them with my kids. And we took 2022 as a year, and every month we would set our pillar goals and
Wow.
hold each other accountable. Every month, let's talk about it. What are your pillar goals? What are you working on in your spiritual? What's your educational? And then we would hold each other accountable. That is literally how we got through it together.
How did the
Yeah.
grief interplay with all of that?
The grief interplayed with all of that because, like, my kids would kind of infuse different things. So, like, my bridge son, my husband was really big into the stock market. He was really big into sports. Like, those were like two of his essential type things. And so my bridge son, one of the things he would do on Mondays for his education, he started learning about the stock market. He's like,
Oh,
I want to
awesome.
honor dad's memory,
Yeah.
and I want to learn, about the stock market. So he started doing that. My youngest son is a thespian by nature, and so things for him for fun, he would make sure that whenever he had an acting gig or anything that he was doing where he was on stage, he always wore an article of clothing of his dad's.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then my oldest son, for him, for community, he started like doing some volunteer work, and things like for charities and things and purposes and causes that were significant and important to my husband. So they each did it in their own little way, and they came up with it themselves organically. It wasn't anything that was
That's
forced or,
amazing.
upon them. And so I loved how my kids, and I love how they even continue now to honor their father.
So I mean, you said you did this 2022. So that's the first year.
That was the first year.
How did you have the energy and the mental energy to do that, to like stay accountable, to stay meeting? Cause like for me, I just, I was just off in a million different directions and barely functioning. But then I would like have these bursts of energy where I'm like tearing the house apart to
Yeah.
like reorganize and re-clean. And like, so I'm like, I need to understand what's in my home so that
Right.
way I can take care of the kids. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to take them here,
Yeah.
here, there. They're like,
Yeah, it was a lot. I mean, I am a project manager by professional trade, and a lot of my background is also related to systems and
gotcha.
conversions and all. And so for me, it was great because it created a system.
Right.
I love systems because they're repeatable, they're predictable, and unless you change them, they're going to output and spit out whatever it is, that's necessary, that's been programmed. And so it became a system, and it became something reliable for me to do to keep my
Mm,
family, together, to keep us integrated and to keep us talking. Like, let's do something fun. What do we go? Let's do a family goal that's fun. So
yeah.
even though we would do like individual goals, what are we going to do as a family for fun? What are we going to do for community? And like one of the big things, and we haven't done it yet. And I actually need to talk to my kids because we said we were going to do it and we haven't. We've all committed to learning CPR.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
That's been like
Yeah.
huge in Buffalo after DeMar
Yeah.
Hamlin. So it's like, I think it's even really across the country, to be honest.
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen a lot. That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's amazing. So in some ways it felt like having the system created energy because then you don't have to think it's already implemented.
Exactly. It's already in place. It's already done for you. It's plug and play. And it's so funny because at one point, my kids were kind of like, "Hey mom, can my friend so and so like join in on the pillar goals?" And I'm like,
Oh,
"Okay."
No way.
So then my kids started doing like the pillar goals with their
Oh my
friends. I'm
God.
like, "Okay."
That's beautiful.
I can't imagine if I went upstairs right now and told my kids we're doing this, they would all just laugh at me.
Yeah.
Because I've tried a million things because I'm the same. So like I'm an engineer by trade. So for me, it was like systems and like scaling those systems was my life for 20 years. So
Yeah.
and that's what I did. Like right after my wife died, I was just like, that's part of why I tore the house apart. So I was like, I need to create systems.
Yep.
And I mean, like with laundry, I was like, okay, this is the color code. So I don't have to think when I put this in, then I know I do this. And then I'm like writing up all of these like standard procedures and all that stuff. So like I relate to that very much. My kids, however, they are a little bit more lackadaisical with trying to do
My
that.
kids
But
think I'm crazy. They do. I
me
know they
too.
love me, and I know they tolerate me.
Mhm.
And they're like, "Okay, mom." And then it's funny because like now, with me being now a life coach and life transitions coach in particular, they're like, "Okay, mom, you've been coaching us forever." Like,
Yeah, they were your first clients.
exactly.
Yeah. So when you're going through all of this, because you lost so many people in your life, where did you find support outside
So
of your kids?
yeah, so my kids, my husband's family. My husband was the youngest of 11.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And
Okay.
Wow.
he and his twin sister were the youngest. And so, yeah. And so my husband's family has been extremely supportive. There's 7 brothers and 3 sisters. And, they're great people. Like my husband, you talk about community and family and wanting to be with one another. My husband, one of the greatest gifts my husband would give to people is literally the gifts of presence. When my husband was with you, you were the center of his attention. He would not multitask. He would not be on his phone, and I was complete opposite. Like we're multitasking everything. And so, having the support of my husband's family was tremendous. At the time, I only had one sister left. All of my other siblings had passed away. And so my sister was a very strong support for me. I have a really good network of friends. And of course, my church family was very supportive for me.
Yeah, that's so good that you had that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And having them come around you right away and being there. The experience of going through that and then becoming a solo parent, which is a term that we got from another guest that we had on, and it's kind of stuck with me because there's a
Mm.
difference between being a solo parent versus a single parent, right? Like
Mm.
there's a difference between being a widower and having to raise children versus, not one's not bad, better or worse.
Right.
They're just different,
They're
right?
different. It's good.
And
Mhm.
and now, like you said, you became a solo parent. You have this first meeting. You're like, I've never done this.
Yeah.
They've never lost a dad. You guys are
Yeah.
in this new territory. But like in talking to you in the past half hour, there is a joyfulness that comes out of you. And is this something you've always had? Is this something you've had to learn? Did this go away for a while when you lost your partner? Like,
I think that I think part of it, if I can honestly say, I really think it resonated from my mom.
mm,
And so, like, I remember at 15 watching my mother when my brother passed away. And I can't imagine. I've, as all the grief that I've experienced, I can't imagine the loss of a child. That's not one I ever want to experience. I can't imagine. But watching my mother and watching how she navigated
mm,
the loss of her baby boy, especially since, and this was really something that stuck with me. My brother did his senior year of high school twice. Now, to understand, my brother was not the strongest academic. He was not at all the strongest academic, but my parents were they stressed education. And so my brother's like, okay, I'm going to try to get a C in English. I'm going to try to get, a B. All right, a B plus, whatever. And so we would literally sit around at the dinner table and work on his homework and, try to get these better grades. And so I'm learning his material. So I was a little more advanced in school because he was 4 years older. So I'm learning his stuff as we're sitting around the table. And my brother, when he got that first B in English, it was like, oh my gosh. And so he decided, I'm working so hard in reading and writing and arithmetic. I'm just going to blow off gym. So he decided to
mm.
start cutting gym class. And so that first marking period, he got the F. And my mom's like, boy, I need you to put the uniform on. And even if you just show up, you'll pass. Like, you cannot, you got to pass gym. And so she told him that first marking period, summer school is not an option for gym. I need you to
Mm.
pass it outright because I will not pay for you to frolic all summer.
Yeah.
And so, sure enough, my brother kept cutting senior year. He kept cutting the first time the gym class, and he failed his first time of senior year because he failed gym.
Oh no.
Yeah. And my mother, like, she was true to her word. You are not going to go to summer school. So he had to do senior year a second time
Oh my God, because of
Mm.
Jim.
because of
Oh,
gym.
because she wouldn't let him do summer
She
school.
would not let him do summer school.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I was like, oh my gosh, like this woman, I was like, that's so mean. Like I felt it was so hard and so harsh, but my mom taught me some things. You've got to your word is your bond. And, even to your own hurt, because I'm sure that hurt her
Yeah.
to have to take that away from him like that. But you've got to your own self be true. But then to watch how he never graduated. And
Mhm.
like literally, we attended his graduation ceremony as honored guests. They covered the chair where he would have sat in the class lineup with flowers and all kinds of, paraphernalia to honor him. That is forever ingrained. Like I can't go to a graduation ceremony and
Yeah.
not see that chair, and to watch my mom, like I feel like I watched her process, her hurt because I know that had to have hurt her, but I also witnessed her strength to encourage other people in the loss of her son. And so I really feel that when my husband and my sister passed away within those 6 days of each other, I really felt like I had the spirit of my mom.
Mm.
And I leaned on my memory of watching her with my brother and then also watching my two other brothers that passed away. They passed away while she was alive. So I watched her also, navigate with those two brothers, with my nephew, with my dad. And so my mom was the example for me to follow. And so I think that's what I'm like, okay, what would my mom do? How would she
Wow.
handle this?
What did that processing look like for you then? Like as you're processing the death? Yeah.
Yeah. So my mom was a great woman of faith. She was. And so it was almost like I would watch her, as she would pray, as she would cry, like we can't, she would cry and let out all of her emotions behind closed doors. And then she would gain strength for when she was in the public setting to do what she needed to do.
You were able to witness it, which is so healthy that she let you guys in on, hey, it's hard.
Yeah,
And
she
you
did.
don't have to like smile all the time.
Exactly. It's okay to not be okay. And, I had to learn that. But then I also had to learn on my personal journey how to navigate my emotions because I'm not a generally outwardly emoting type person. And so I had to learn how to acknowledge my feelings, accept them for what they are in this moment,
Mm-hmm.
be aware of them, but then what action am I going to take? And so that became very important for me, to acknowledge it. Don't ignore the feeling. They are an outward expression of some inner feeling that you can't ignore. And so I have literally, like some people ask, how are you? One day I might be good, and another day I'm still processing. And that's okay.
That's right.
It's okay to still be processing, and it's okay to not be okay. And you never know how it's going to hit you. I was telling
Yeah,
someone the other
exactly.
day, you never
Yeah.
know. Like my husband was a letter carrier. He worked for the US Postal Service for 34 years. And when he passed away, he was 6 weeks from retirement.
Oh,
And
Oh.
so we were really excited about him, retiring finally and, all of this. And so, I remember the first time I went out and I left the house and I saw a mail truck. And when I saw that mail truck, I thought about my husband and how he had like 670 some stops on his route. And I thought about the cold and the heat and how he would, serve and how he would just provide for us and I'm like, I don't know how you do it. Like, I
mm,
couldn't be out in that heat and in
Yeah.
the cold, and everybody loved, Mr. Marty, their mailman, and so he had relations with his clients and all of that. And so when I saw that mail truck, I immediately thought about that letter carrier and all that they're enduring, being out on roads and cars passing and being out after dark. And, sometimes it's not safe sometimes anymore
no.
out here. And so I immediately began to just pray for them, like, God, just protect them, give them strength, bless their families. Like, I just was really like, I felt the need to just cover them in prayer. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, I felt like, wow, that was a very strengthening type exercise. And I'm like,
Mm.
wow, that was great. Well, the next time I went out and I saw a mail truck, I had to pull to the side of the road because I was crying so profusely. So it's like, I'm like, oh, wow, I thought I was good.
Yeah. Yeah,
So you never
exactly.
know how it's going to trigger you. And you have to be okay with it not being okay and not feeling that you're in control because you're really
Exactly.
not.
You have to let go of that
Gotta
control.
let
And that's
go.
like I had to learn that lesson. It's like I could be exactly the same thing. It's like I could see one thing one day and just feel like, oh, I want to, like I feel inspired. I feel like I
Yeah.
want to help or do something. And then the next I see it, I'm just like, I'm a
Right.
mess. I'm a mess. I'm a complete and utter
Yeah.
mess. Or like it could be somebody says something so benign to you and it just like rips your heart out for some
Yeah.
crazy reason. But yeah, it's like letting go of that control and
Absolutely.
just like allowing yourself to process. But like, what a beautiful thing that your mom gave you. Right. And
She
I think
did.
about with my kids, it's, and I think I'm taking this, I'm using this of like, I've never been like, I want to go have a conversation with my kids so bad right now of this, like, hey, I've never been a dad. I've never been a widowed
Right.
dad and all this, like, but it's such a powerful reframe.
Yeah.
And, and I think about that with them too, where I was like, I know that I'm going to fail them in some way or another.
Hmm.
Like I can't be perfect for them.
That's right.
And when the grief hit, like it was all I could do just to get them fed.
Yeah.
But my choice in those moments has always been honesty to them
Yeah.
and letting them know where I'm coming from. Hey,
That's good.
I'm feeling this way. I'm sad. This isn't okay. I'm not
Mhm.
okay. I'm happy. I'm not happy. Like there is a gamut of emotions that we experience, and sometimes we experience them moments apart from each other,
Right.
because I never wanted them to look at me and think dad's acting in a way that I'm not sensing he's truly feeling.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. Cause I don't want them to ever doubt their intuition
That's
and
right.
ever
That's
doubt their
good.
I think
judgment.
that's like amazing though, because they'll also kind of understand, like that's a skill that not everyone has in terms of like
Mhm.
expressing the feeling, like,
Right.
what, like even I think we kind of talked about this literally last night, like if it's the grief, if it's related to the grief, or if it was like I was bullied at school, I'm frustrated. Or like, I was bullied at school, and I want to come home and tell my mom, but I can't, and she's not here, and so I'm mad, so I
Right.
think that like leading by doing, and sometimes like my dad wasn't great about that in terms of like,
Yeah, I was just going to ask you.
like he would he would want to put on a brave face for us, I think,
Mhm.
and always try to like, which there is obviously a lot of honor in that, or, like strength.
Courage,
Yeah. But it's like, it's kind of like you said, Paul, like it's okay to not be okay. And you have to be able to, like, articulate that. Otherwise you
You have
yourself,
to.
can't help you can't help yourself, and others can't help you, or kind of have that like, okay, like I see you're mad, like I have got to get you some space.
Mhm.
And oh, it's not my fault that you're mad. Like I think that's another thing, CJ, I don't know if like they feel that way, but like articulating that I'm frustrated because like
Mhm.
I can't launch the new website, like it's
Right.
like, okay, I know dad is not mad at me, or dad is not
That's
mad
right.
that like mom is not here.
That's a good point.
So I think like those are really important things to like, just, I mean, as they grow up, as kids grow up,
Mhm.
you have to be able. And Paul, it seems like with the system, like your kids, like you were very open and honest, like always with them in terms of how you were feel like.
Absolutely. Very, very honest with them. And, one of the expressions that became important to me was I dedicated 2022. I have a blog, and I started that blog on my 50th birthday, actually in honor of my
Mm.
mom, because she always would. When I was a child, I used to write little stories and do all kinds of things until some child tragedy came my way and I shut all that down. But my
Mm.
mom was always the one that would encourage me to write. And so I decided on my 50th birthday to start a blog and in her memory, in her honor. And so I blog the first of every month. And then on the 16th of every month, I literally go live on my social platforms, because I
Mm.
go live at 8:09 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And there's significance to all that because my birthday is January the 16th. So I publish my blog the first of the month. The 16th of the month, I go live on video and just share about the blog and try to interact with my followers. And I do
Mhm.
it at 8:09 p.m. because that represents 2009 military time, which my mom died in 2009. So that's
Oh,
kind of like
wow.
how I kind of
That's
pull it all
beautiful.
together. And so I decided for 2022 I wanted to dedicate my blog to my husband. So that was my community goal. When you get back to those pillar goals,
Oh, yeah,
one of
yeah.
my community goals was to write about my husband. Because quite honestly, I think our love story, how we came to be, how we lived, I think it's actually pretty interesting and fascinating because there's so many tangled webs, with the whole concept. And so I just decided my husband's name was Martin, and so I decided to write weekly for my blog
Mm.
and to do a segment called Martin Mondays. And so every Monday, I would write, just a small anecdotal story about our life. And, I would always close it with, so what is the lesson here? Don't just look at
Mm.
Martin and Paula. How does this apply to your life? And what can you glean from our story to apply to your relationships, not just marital relationships, but all relationships? And so I started doing that, every Monday, and it got kind of crazy because it was like people would be looking for it. Like I'm a night owl. So I would generally publish it, like maybe 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, but then some mornings I might not do it till 8. Well, I noticed that some people were looking for it by like 6 a.m. So then I started having this kind of service level agreement to get it out,
That's
every
amazing.
Monday morning by 6 a.m. And then somewhere around like month 3 or 4, I'm like, this is a lot. Like people were sharing it, and it was really growing into this whole kind of movement. And I realized this isn't just a blog, this is a
Right.
book. And so I then decided, okay, let's make this a book. And so I decided to launch the book and release it the next year, January 2023, on what would have been my husband's 61st birthday. So that was
Oh, that's
my birthday
awesome.
gift to him to
That's
release our
amazing.
book.
That
Yeah.
is so
So,
awesome. So it's interesting. I've I've been doing the same thing, sharing stories about my wife and all that stuff, or
yeah.
even in conversation. But my question to you is, because I experienced this panic after she died of like sharing these stories of, okay, all of a sudden I had this huge weight of, I'm in charge of her legacy. I'm in
Hmm.
charge of these stories to get them right. But I like, what if my memory fails me? What if like I say something and it was, well, she actually didn't mean that, or she didn't say that, or it was a little bit different. Like, and I just like had this like overwhelm where I just felt way too in charge of her legacy. Did you experience that? Like as you're posting every Monday, you're sharing these stories of you guys together and what that was like. Like, did you
Yeah, I
experience
wanted
any of
to
that?
be accurate, like I wanted to remember them as accurately as I could, because I had some
Yeah.
onlookers that were witnesses to some of this stuff too. So I needed to make sure that the accuracy so the accuracy was there. But to be honest, I don't really think I ever felt a pressure. In fact, if anything, I felt a sense of relief, because it's like, wow, I never even told this story. Or
Wow.
like, I never even thought about how significant this event was. Like, now that in retrospect, this was a pivotal moment in our lives. And so I think for me, writing the stories has become therapeutic,
Mm-hmm.
and it's become helpful because now I have something that is a legacy for my children and my children's children. And so it's interesting because my bridge son, my
I love
boys,
that. I love that.
they're so funny. Thank you. He kind of picked up on the concept, and so he and I have a touch point meeting every Sunday night, and he calls like recipe, because he lives out of state now. He's the one that's not in state. And so we have a touch point every Sunday night, and it's called like recipes, relationships, and something, where he like literally he wants to like interview me about things. He wants to make
Oh,
sure
no
I teach
way.
him how to make certain things. So maybe some Sunday nights we might be cooking. Let's cook together. Mom,
Yeah.
teach me how to make this. Am I doing this
Oh, I
right?
love that.
That's
And
so
then
awesome.
like every month he'll send me questionnaires. Like, I need you to answer these questions. So it's kind of neat. So he's kind of picked up the concept of legacy building, not retrospectively, but let's do that real time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
awesome. That's amazing. So the other thing I want to touch on too is back to the grief, especially the early grief,
Mm.
as you're grieving and going
Which
through
one?
these things.
Which
Yeah,
one?
I know. That's right. Early grief can mean many things in this context,
Yeah.
but with your husband and then specifically with your kids, when you were witnessing them struggling with their grief, or not even struggling, but just
Hmm.
experiencing it, but you are also experiencing it,
Hmm.
what did you do in those moments to show up for them, or did you struggle to show up for them? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah. So our mantra, as we were standing there, when my husband passed away that day, our mantra became grace and space. So I'm going to give you grace, and I'm going to give you space to navigate it. Because at the end of the day, you are the best subject matter expert of your life.
That's right.
And so I'm here for support, but I'm not here to force myself. And so, I would just avail myself. Sometimes we cried together. And you have to understand a person's love language. Those love languages is a big thing. And my kids and I are doing love languages this month. I can't wait to see
Oh, nice.
everybody's, results. But there's also grief language. Everybody grieves differently.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's important to watch and understand a person's grief language. And, like for instance, it didn't even dawn on me. Like I remember when we came home from the hospital, I put out the APB that my kids and I were not accepting any visitors at the house. Like,
Mm.
paramedics had come to our house. It looked like Grand Central Station. I just wanted us to get back in our home and let us process this. It was the day before Thanksgiving. Just let us have this day to process this for ourselves before we get bombarded with people, because that was one of the things I remember when my brother passed at 15. Before we could like get back home from the hospital, people were like there, and it's like all these people, and
Mhm.
I haven't even processed this for myself. And so one of my mama bear protective modes was like, no, no, my kids and I are going to go in the house, we're going to shut the door, and we'll see y'all on Thanksgiving, perhaps. Like we
Yeah.
we need a moment. And so I remember when we came in the house, my bridge son, yet again, I don't know why I keep talking about him, but it was funny because my husband had cooked breakfast that morning. He wanted to make his own breakfast. We've been, cooking him breakfast because my husband had ruptured his Achilles 25 days before he passed away.
Oh
Oh
gosh.
my god.
And it was a freak accident. He ruptured his Achilles. And as a result, he wasn't working. He was about to retire. And they were like, by the time you recover, you'll be already into retirement. And so it was that incident of rupturing his Achilles and the sedentary lifestyle that caused him to develop a blood clot. And that's what
No
traveled to his heart
way.
and instantly killed him with the heart attack. So we had been servicing him the whole time, cooking for him and, doing everything. But that particular morning when he passed away, he was like, I want to come downstairs. I want to fix my own breakfast. I'm like, sir,
Mm.
like we've been giving you breakfast in bed. You've been getting the royal treatment. Like, what do you mean?
Right.
He was like, well, y'all can cook okay, but y'all can't, cook like, I'm like,
That is
really?
so funny.
Oh, that's amazing.
So he came down, we helped him downstairs. We got him situated. We set it up where he could sit at the stove and cook, all that kind of stuff. And so he had made some fried potatoes. And, I'm from the Philadelphia area. So like scrapple,
Yeah.
that crappy meat, but it's so good,
Hmm.
So he had made some scrapple and some other things. And so there was still some of that left because it was the morning time when my husband collapsed and all. And so I remember we came home from the hospital, my bridge son, he comes over to me and he says, hey, mom, he said, do you think there's anything wrong with freezing food that you never intend to eat?
Mm.
And I'm like, why would you do that? Like I wasn't thinking, but I'm just like, why would you freeze something that you're never going to eat? Like that's kind of a waste of putting it in the freezer. And he looked at me and he kind of, lowered his head a little bit and he was like, Dad's potatoes. And I
Yeah.
was just like, oh yeah, I said, put them
Yeah.
in a container, wrap them real good, but it was like I wasn't processing his grief, but once I noticed it, I had to give him that space. And like literally sitting in my freezer today is this very carefully wrapped container of potatoes. I don't know if we'll ever take it out. I don't know what we'll ever do with it, but it's there. And, it's very gingerly wrapped potatoes.
That is like amazing
Yeah.
though. I
Yeah.
love that. That
Yeah.
is a
Yeah,
But
that is
beautiful
awesome.
story.
yeah, at the end of the day, you have to be sensitive to the grief of another. And then even though you may not understand it, even though you may not agree with how they're processing, it's their process. And so the key is to honor their process and
Hmm.
support them in their process. Because my kids are just kind of like, Mom, like we don't talk about it as openly as you do. And that's part of my process. I talk about it openly. I acknowledge that there's a gift associated with grief, and I'm constantly unwrapping the gift of grief. And my kids are like, Mom, that's but for my son, my thespian son, honoring his dad, like I never said anything when I noticed that he was wearing articles of clothing of his dad's. I'd be like, oh, you look nice. And, he's like, this is dad's shirt, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, that is your dad's shirt. Like I'm not going to be like, of course I know it's your dad's shirt.
Right.
But he's like, yeah, I want to make sure that I always know whether it's cufflinks, whether it's his tie, whether it's his cologne. Like I want to make sure I have a piece of dad every time I hit that stage because dad always encouraged me with my acting and my singing. So I'm like, so you have to process it however, they are processing it.
Yeah. And
So,
I think that bears repeating, that
Yeah, it does.
everybody grieves differently, and we want to give them space. So I think that the grace and space is amazing.
Yeah, I like that phrasing. I feel like grace is something that just always comes up. Like, it's really like grief teaches you grace. That's for sure.
Mm.
But
it
I
does.
really like like there's love languages, like there's grief languages. Because,
Hmm.
some people would not, saving the potatoes or like continuing a tradition. Like some people, like that doesn't help them, grieve. If any, sometimes it might bring up bad memories, or it does, it doesn't help them kind of process it or feel like they're, carrying on their memory. But for others, like I'm very much like a carry on the tradition. And like I love wearing some of her jewelry that I have and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd be very interested to dive into that. Grief languages.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be amazing
Mm-hmm.
to explore. But yeah, and it's true in giving space. And I've noticed that with my kids too. They're all so different in how they want to talk about it or share. And sometimes it can feel frustrating as a parent to be like, hey, like, process your grief more. But it's like they are it's just different, and it's not the same. Like I'm like you, Paul, like I'm very open obviously about it and sharing, and I'm going to write about it, and I'm going to tell people about it so others can like be like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going through the same thing. Whereas some of my kids are just like, no, I'm not going to talk about it at all,
But that's like, I think as someone who doesn't normally speak, or I speak little about it, I take, this triggers me. But I think that, like, I saw your post last night about Grace's like amazing drawing.
Yeah.
And that might be something that she's actually doing as like a form of processing her grief. She might not even realize she's doing that as a form of processing her grief. Like I like love painting pottery, and painting pottery had like nothing to do with my mom or anything like that. I find it like so therapeutic. And
Mm-hmm.
I do it on like when I'm happy, or, like when I want to get friends together. But like, I really want to get a pottery wheel. But that aside, like there's just different things that like, maybe it's not necessarily like in that moment, I'm like, I'm going to go paint pottery and process my grief. I'm just like, I'm going to go do this thing that I know that I like really enjoy doing. I'm not like the best at it, but like, I do a pretty decent job, and it's kind of serves that like therapeutic, like get my feelings out, and it's not saying anything, but it's still, expressing myself. So I think that grief language is so big. And also like, just because someone doesn't grieve like you do doesn't mean they're not grieving.
Exactly. Yeah. 100%.
That's right. It looks different. Like, yeah, like, I remember I kind of took a lot of heat. It's funny how people, sometimes people don't know what to say, and
Yeah.
you got to give them grace and space too. But, I sing at my church, and I'm part of the music team, and my husband passed away on, like I said, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and I was scheduled, and my son at the time, he was 16, he was scheduled to sing as part of the team that coming Sunday. And so, of course, my friends are like, "You're not singing at church on Sunday, are you?" I'm like, yeah, I'll be at church and I'm singing. They're like, no, you can't do that. I'm like, why not? Like, that's, my faith is part of what's helping me to get through this. So, of course, I want to go. And, my husband loved church. And yeah, that helps me to feel, that I'm with, in his presence as well. And they're like, no, no. So they're calling my pastor and they're like, no, you can't do that. Tell her, pastor, she
Wow.
can't do it, and she's not thinking straight, and I'm just like, I'm a grown woman. I think I
Right.
know if I want to sing or not. And so I didn't want to influence my son. I told him, because he's like, Mom, are you going to do it? I said, I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing. I said, I want you to come to terms with what you're most comfortable with doing.
Yeah.
I said, and then we can determine. He's like, well, I want to do it. And I was like, okay, fine. Then we'll sing. And so literally my son and I, the Sunday after, it's like, what, 3-4 days, we're standing in front of, two services, hundreds of people, and we're singing. It was like the weirdest thing, and some people, because I'm not the broken down widow that's just
Yeah.
crying and falling apart. Like one person actually came to me, like a couple weeks after my husband passed, and they were like, "You're so strong, and I just don't know how you do it." And they're like, "Do you even really miss your husband?"
Oh,
That's
no.
like
I'm like,
disgusting. That makes me
"Oh
like
my God."
angry.
No.
I was just so in my mind, I'm just like, okay, I'm ready to clock her. Like, I'm ready to can we just crucify her right now and maybe we can just
Right.
resurrect her later, Lord, or something? Because like, I can't believe she just said that. So I'm like, okay, I said, sweetheart, let me make sure I understand what you're asking me. You mean, do I miss the person that I've probably spent the last 32 to 33 years of my life with? The person that literally has known me even before I knew myself from the day that I was born, because he's been a family friend and he's always known me. The person that has always been my biggest supporter, the cheerleader, my lover, the father of my 3 sons. And I just went on and on. I said, "You're asking me if I miss that person?" I said, "I just want to make sure I understand what you're asking me so I can answer your question properly." And she's like, "Oh, yeah. Well, when you put it like that, of course you miss him." I'm like, "Yeah, when you put it
Yes.
like that."
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think like that's the thing. You can have joy on your face
Yeah.
by singing, by doing pottery, by
Yeah.
anything in life, or being with somebody in communion with them and
Right.
still be sad
Still be
and miss
sad.
your
Yeah.
loved one. Like this is a concept that it seems like it's just not common enough where
Exactly.
and it breeds this guilt in people who are like, okay, so does that mean I always have to look solemn? I always
Yeah.
have to be
Right.
crying? I
Right.
can't laugh because then what? I'm like disrespecting the
Right.
dead, or
Yeah.
all of a
The
sudden I'm
two
saying
the
I
two
don't like love
coexist.
them.
Like, yeah,
Right.
they
They
coexist.
always coexist. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
It like, and I hate that that happened to you, that you had that said to you, but also I feel so seen because I've had so many shitty things said to me too,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
I'm just like, how is this possible?
Yeah.
Like, how is it possible? And it's beyond the people don't know what to say. There's just some people that say very insensitive and
Oh, I
horrific
know.
things.
Oh, like, yeah. "Oh, I know that you'll find another husband." Well, I didn't
Yeah.
say I was looking for one. Like,
Yeah.
Right.
mm,
Right. The assumption that you would want to.
Sometimes you're like, why is that even the thing that they think?
All the
right.
time.
Mhm.
You won't be lonely. Don't worry.
Right.
You're young.
Oh, yeah,
You'll
you're
find
young.
someone.
I don't know. I just like don't understand really like where that comes. I think it's like when you just don't experience like something if you've never gone through it,
Yeah.
it's like you kind of like you just think that that's kind of like what I don't even know. I'm like, if you actually think about that statement, like, do you think that's what you would want to be told? Like, if you just lost your husband, it's like, oh, well, you'll find someone. Like, maybe I'm not gonna fucking look for anyone.
Right.
Like, maybe I'm happy to be alone now. Like, I don't know. Like, also, like, what happens if what happens if you were like thrilled? Like, I don't know. And
Right.
you're like,
Exactly.
I would just start replying like, I know I'm gonna find another one. Thank God.
That's right.
He was a
Yeah.
miserable son of a bitch.
Right.
And to be honest, like it is a joke, but also I think like we talk a lot about like these amazing marriages, right? Like I had an amazing marriage, you had an amazing marriage. Like you do
Mhm.
hear
Yeah.
those stories a lot, but there are instances where people had a very challenging time,
Yes.
right? So like that can present an even different type of grief where
Absolutely.
you still of course are going to be hurt and miss, but then you're also
Yes.
like, but I also feel conflicted, or I would
Mhm.
assume, because this was a really challenging situation. So
Absolutely.
like, yeah, like, and just to assume like, well, I'm going to project onto you because man, I'd feel lonely. So I'd want to be somebody with
Yeah.
as fast as possible. Like it's
Mhm.
just a very canned statement that brings more hurt than anything.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
man, so a lot of stuff we've covered, and I am so glad that you came on because there's some like really heavy key topics that you were able to bring about. And I want to ask before we go, what advice would you have for somebody who has been in your shoes, and you have some very big shoes with a whole lot of grief? So you can be as broad or as narrow as you would like, but just to leave people with some of the things
Yeah,
that you would want to give to them.
I kind of alluded to it earlier. I think through my journey, I am discovering, because I can't say I've, mastered it completely, but I am discovering that there is a gift of grief,
Mm-hmm.
as strange and as odd as it may seem. And I'm a person that likes acronyms. So I take the word gift, and within grief, there has to be some level of gratitude. Like when I think, as huge as this world is, like my husband said, like of all the persons who could have been your dad, I'm the one that's your dad. And you're the one of all the children that I could have had that's my son. And so I don't take relationships lightly. There's a reason why that person is in my life. And so my job is to make sure that I understand who and why that person is in my life. What's the purpose? What's the intentionality? And to be grateful for that and to glean whatever lessons that I need to learn from that relationship, and then allow them to help me to grow.
Yeah.
Because we don't just go through things, we have to grow through things. And so the G in gift is gratitude and growth. The I for me is intentionality. Like for me, I have redefined purpose now. And so there's a reason why I'm here, and I don't want to live any day without fulfilling what my purpose is. So I'm very intentional about understanding my purpose, about understanding how I influence others, and about understanding how I want my legacy to be. But that also takes introspection. So the I's are intentionality and introspection, making sure that I understand myself, and I'm being honest and being authentic with myself and presenting myself in that most honest and authentic way. Then the F, I think, also is, being focused. Being focused on what it is that you're doing, focusing on that person, focusing on your family, and understanding the impacts of the loss, and moving forward, being forward thinking. Like, okay, this is how I'm feeling in this moment, but is this how I always want to feel? What is my path forward here? Like what am I going, what is my next? Where is this taking me, and how am I moving forward through this process? And then lastly, with T, it's about being transformative. Like, I'm a different person now. I mother
Yeah.
differently. I sister differently. Because of the losses that I've experienced, I've been transformed. I am a different person. And so, like I said, you go through it, but you also grow through it. And so I'm being transformed, but then I also have a tenacity, about me. I'm determined that I refuse to let me have had this experience, this life experience with this person, for it not to change me, and then for me not to use it to watch and garner and shepherd over how I influence others. And so I'm constantly unwrapping the gift of grief and working through it, knowing that it's a journey. It's not about this one time destination that I get to, but I am going through the journey from grief to growth.
Mic drop. That was awesome.
Paula, where can we find your book?
They are all on Amazon under my name, Paula Hollis.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much. And we'll definitely add we'll add all the links and everything. But thank you so much, Paula, for coming on. We appreciate you, your energy, your spirit. And it was great. Yeah. It was awesome.
Thanks for having me, CJ, and Ashley, and thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Day After. You can find this podcast and more at our website at www.thedayafter.com. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate if you could take a moment to leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts.